And so I know that Will implied that the book was maybe a little bit out of date now, but by no means is that true, everyone. I just wanted to reassure you, especially the chapter that I wrote as well. So today I'll be talking about two things. The first is just this one slide to give a flavor of the chapter that I contributed to the book. And the second then is a case study of a company which has changed its organization to be really digital, or to help with the drive of digital going forward as well. So I'll just start off with this slide then. And in this chapter, it was entitled The Digital Transformation Execution in Japan. But you can think of it as being applicable to almost any transformation. And I talk about the challenges, and of course, language is always a challenge here, because you have three groups of people: those that only speak Japanese, those that only speak the other language, and then you have the people in between, the bilinguals, who can speak both, and each of those have a different knowledge set. So the challenge there is always to understand who has what information to make sure the right information gets into the right place. Cultural, of course, and for this I was relying on Hofstede, or two books really, Hofstede and Mayer, and they talk about things such as uncertainty avoidance here in Japan. The fact that generally Japanese people like to be very certain about what's happening. It's the reason they ask so many questions. They want to plan in detail, and it's something you've got to handle as part of the transformation. Of course, the traditional hierarchies here are very rigid, or can be very rigid as well. So you've got to consider those, because it can inhibit communication up the chain, not so much down the chain of command. And then avoiding confrontation as well is a tendency with many Japanese people as well, to not speak up and not say what they disagree with. And the last challenge then is environmental. So it's not just the market here, it's not just the organizations, the government organizations you need to work with, but it's even the customer themselves. So Japanese customers tend to be very picky, and if they have a bad experience with the company, up to 50% of them won't go back to it. That's in comparison to other countries where obviously there's a variety there, but it can be 20 or 30%. So one mistake here can lose you a customer. The next step then is the key success factors, and I'm sure many of you will have heard about these, and have experience of these yourselves. I go into some detail in the chapter, but obviously tailoring, any business model you want to bring to Japan, you've got to tailor it to Japan. You've got to understand the market, work with your partners, and make sure that the business model that you implement is really fit for Japan. Partnering, of course, with those business partners, with your teams. You've got to be able to work together. They've got to be able to tell you anything. You've got to be able to tell them anything. Without that true partnership, it's not going to work. And then communication, obviously, is part of that as well. Not just the formal communication, but the informal, how you build those relationships, how you keep talking about things, but also you keep communicating about the change that you're bringing and how it's going to work. Lastly then, opportunity. I think for people that have been in Japan for a long time, you understand that it's a great place to be. It's a great market. It's a large market as well. And often the teams here have very, very good execution capability. So if you can bring the right model with and find the right partners, you can have a really good opportunity to make a lot of money here. So that's quickly about the chapter of the book. And next, I'm going to talk about, if I can find the page down. Okay, we didn't try this in the practice, did we? Let me do it manually then. I'll find out how to do it later. Okay, so I'll leave it like this actually, so that it's easy for everyone. actually easier for me. So now I'll talk about building the digital organization. So in this, I'm really focusing on the organization itself. Of course, you need the digital tools, you need the processes, but the organization is just as important, because if you don't have the right organization, you won't be able to move forward as quickly as you want. The hierarchies will still be in place and the silos as well. So that's really the focus here. And when you consider digitalization, why are we doing this? The big reason is that many companies have a large amount of organizational debt. And organizational debt is a term coined by Steve Blank. And he termed it initially for startups, but it applies to any companies. And it's the changes, it's the old practices that companies have, which they haven't changed or haven't brought up to date, which actually hold them back. And I give a few examples of this here. The first one is a quote from Jim Whitehurst, the CEO of Red Hat. And Red Hat is famously a very flat organization, and this is what he says: traditional leadership hierarchies are dead or should be. Now, they do inhibit communication. There's so many layers, there's so many approvals required. They really delay any kind of execution. Next then is function-based organizations. I mentioned silos, and when companies are function-based, they tend to optimize within that function. So operations works for itself. You have marketing and sales, just working within their own organization to optimize as they can. But this is linked to the next point here. This means that the value streams which deliver value to the customer, they can be undefined, and they're definitely suboptimal. So if you can't bring the organization together to look at that value stream as a single unit and evaluate it together, then you're not going to make the progress you want. Next is low employee engagement, and this is a problem all around the world. Employee engagement is incredibly low. It's anywhere, I think, under 50%. Employees don't enjoy what they do. They don't feel they have any control over their processes. They're not really interested, and so don't put in their best effort. Lastly then, old methodologies and processes. So this can be old project methodologies, for example, but also processes, such as the annual budget process. So I think many of us are caught up in this time of year, and it's a very old process in many companies. The validity of that budget decays very quickly after its initial creation, and in the company I'm actually working at the moment, they even did a 5-year budget process at the department level. So they're asking department heads what they need for the next 5 years. And of course, they have no idea what's going to change. Okay, so then for this company, in the case study, these are the basic steps for implementation. And it wasn't really planned from the start by the management. It really happened organically, based on some experimentation, proof of concept, and the feedback from them. And as it often does, it started in IT, where they were experimenting with Agile in 1 or 2 areas to see whether it would improve things, and it did. So the company decided to set up a single cross-functional team, a proof of concept, working in Agile for a single product. And this included not only the IT people, but some of the operations, the sales and marketing together as well. And this went extremely well. There was good feedback, not only from management, but the teams themselves were more engaged, and they were visibly more engaged. And the speed of delivery was much better too. So they decided to expand this across several other teams, and they got very similar feedback. It was a vast improvement on the way they've been working to date. So the decision was made to expand this to the whole company. And once you do that, of course, you need to understand at a company level how it's going to work. And it's very difficult to come up with something yourself. So they looked at several models globally, and they selected the ING transformation model. Of course, as I mentioned before, you can't use it as is. You need to tailor anything to Japan and your company. So they set about tailoring it, designing the company they wanted based on that model. At the same time, they looked at the physical environment. So you can't, it's difficult to work in fixed desks without any collaboration spaces if you're working in Agile. So they changed the physical environment. And then, of course, training and coaching. So many people, particularly on the business side, they really didn't have an understanding of how Agile works. So they gave them initial training, but also continued to give them coaching as they went as well. And then for the first set of sprints, they set objective key results. So these were results designed by the teams themselves, targets they wanted to meet over the next 3 months, and they also put in measures of the as how far they could go on to some of those targets. Lastly, then they had a big kickoff event. This was an event with over 500 people over a couple of days, and it was really there to get everyone on the same page, to get everyone started together, and that in the end worked extremely well as well. So, this is the structure. I mentioned the ING transformation model, and this is really based on the squad. So the squad is a team of up to 9 people. It's multi-skilled, that cross-functional team. It's self-organizing, and it's given the power and the authority to, over the product that it owns, so it can move forward quickly. The tribe then is a collection of these squads, and sometimes it's a group of products or a group of missions, and so it enables them to come together and discuss how they need to work together, as inevitably they have to sometimes. And then you have across the horizontal the chapters, so supporting teams, centers of excellence, people with the common skills that can get together, share ideas and suggestions about how to improve those skills. And then from the roles, you have the product owners, of course, who are responsible for the backlog, the Scrum Master who drives the processes and looks for productivity improvements, the tribe lead over a number of squads, and this is really to just make sure the squads are working in harmony and as required to set guardrails. And then the chapter leads who are responsible for really the line manager for the teams, and then promoting personal growth and innovation within the skill set of that chapter. Okay, and there were a number of focus areas. The company recognized that it was important to really have a culture that's open to change, and this was actually started before the Agile transformation. And the first one, most important one, was psychological safety, and this is extremely important in Japan, where people can be a little bit risk averse. You've got to explain to people that you want them to take on challenges, to take some risks. Let them understand that a failure is not always a bad thing. You can learn just as much from failures as successes. So really creating this psychological safe environment was critical. Empowerment, distributed decision making was also very important. If you don't give the teams the ability to make decisions, and let them know that they can move forward without consulting management all the time, they won't be able to do so. The next point then around, really this is career advancement, to let people know, how they can advance in their careers, what the paths are through the new organization to senior positions. Fourth then, employee happiness, and this is something which is ongoing. Every month or so, there's a survey around how you're feeling, what is working for you, what isn't working. It can get a little repetitive sometimes, but it gives you an outlet to voice any concerns that you have. Next then is the MVP, experimentation, Kaizen mindset. And of course, this goes hand in hand with Agile. And this was continually stressed to the teams. Next then, or last, is the extensive sharing of new ideas, tools, and successes. This was not just done at a local level, it was done globally. So each of the different areas shared via Yammer or mail or videos, what they were doing, what was working, what didn't work. They shared books, videos on YouTube, and anything which they thought would be useful to other teams to know. So it really created an ongoing learning environment. But of course, there's always challenges whenever you take on any such transformation. The first is the alignment of squad objectives. Of course, when you have different squads working independently, there's always a chance that they will want to do different things, and sometimes it might not make sense. Sometimes you've got to allow it. So as part of the 3-month cycle of renewing priorities, this was also looked at to make sure that the squads didn't go too far apart. Reinforcing the culture and mindset, it's so easy to fall back into old ways of working. So this was continually stressed and examples given to the teams. Every 2 weeks, and there were sprint reviews, of course, looking at the products of the teams, but every month or so, there were also discussions around the mindset, the way of working as well. You also need a bit of governance sometimes. So if multiple squads have the same target customers, you've got to make sure that those target customers get a consistent message. They're not bombarded if it's from marketing with emails. So you need a bit of governance for those touch points to customers, and just to make sure that the company as a whole has a consistent view. Working with traditional partners, internal, external, was also a challenge. So Will touched upon this a little bit. If you're stuck in the middle and you want to work agile, but your partners don't, it can be very difficult to. And this company also has a large global component to its IT architecture. And that continual view of what should be local, what should be global, particularly in Japan with the language difficulties as well, that was a continual and continues to be a point of difficulty, and one of the challenges in the ongoing drive to become more and more agile. Lastly then, encouraging ambition. It's easy for the teams to take little steps to get the quick wins, but what you really want them to do is to take the bigger steps and go for those bigger challenges as well. So part of the challenge of some of the product owners and the tribe leads was to push the teams to try and do a little bit more, not go for something small, but go for something bigger, and let them know that they're safe if it fails. Okay, the benefits then, and this, I think I wrote this initially about 6 months ago. It's still true, I think, partly due to COVID, that it's difficult to measure how well this has gone because there are so many other factors now, so many big factors. But the qualitative benefits are clear. The company has a much reduced hierarchy. There are far fewer managers, and those managers now doers. They can be product owners, they can be scrum managers, they can be tribe leads or chapter leads, but they're much more hands-on than they used to be, and many of them really like that. Next then is the employee understanding of the business and the engagement. So because the squads are cross-functional, because they work together all the time, IT understands the marketing piece, understands the sales piece. Sales and marketing understand how some of the IT works and some of the restrictions around it as well. So all the employees have a much better understanding of the end-to-end business. And that really links to the point to the right here, leveraging the knowledge, skills, and creativity of all employees. So because they're all engaged, they all have an understanding, then each of them can contribute to the changes in the product, the evolution of the product, and even the approach and implementation as well. So that engagement issue that I talked about, can be greatly reduced because they're much more engaged on this. Of course, there's a huge increase in the speed of delivery. There are some difficulties still, working with partners who can't take the agile methodology on board. But still, even then, there's a big increase in speed. But for me, the last point is the most important. Change is in the hands of the employees. Change is no longer a top-down management directive. Change is with the employees. They decide where they're going to take their product, how it's going to evolve, what they need to do it. If they need new skills, if they want to learn a new technology, they can do so. This, I think, for me, is the critical difference here in the organization. So just a brief summary then. Okay, attempt to change, keep trying until you succeed or cease to exist. I didn't put a copyright on that, I should have done. Anyway, companies can't avoid disruption. Disruption is going to happen as we're seeing now. And the tendency, unfortunately, is to react and not act. And many companies do this. They wait. They don't think it's going to really impact them. It happens, and then it can be too late. So you've got to stay ahead of the trend. So as well as digitalization, you've got to be aware of technical debt, organizational debt. You've got to understand where your company is behind and whether it's critical to your company that it is behind or not, because that's essential to your survival. And of course, what I've described here is not the end. There's always going to be new evolutions happening. Do we need any managers? There are companies around the world with almost no managers now. And can we give teams the complete responsibility for their finances, the PL responsibility? There are companies doing that as well. And here I can recommend a couple of books. There's a great book by Frederic Laloux, Reinventing Organizations, which gives examples of companies around the world with very few managers and the way they work. And another one, which is out recently, called Humanocracy by Greg Hamel. And this talks about reducing bureaucracy, how reducing bureaucracy can really release the creativity of companies. And he does put a $3 trillion tag on that. He believes that bureaucracy, if it was taken out completely, could increase global GDP by 3 trillion. So I haven't looked into the details of that claim, but obviously that's not a small amount. Okay, so that's it from me. Albert, thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. There's one quick question from Omar.
Sure.
Asking whether this specific project was done with external vendors that have agile experience or all done organically.
So good question, Omar. Thanks for joining. Yeah, this was done with external vendors, and they helped design, they helped some of the coaching and teaching, the training. But the good thing I thought was that they set the company up to walk away so that they could walk away as it started or soon afterwards. And of course they kept in touch and they helped monitor a little bit, but they stepped back so the company was on its own feet really from very close to the beginning.